You're listening to Skills World Live with Tom Bewick. News, views and interviews in association with FE News. Hello everyone, I'm Tom Bewick. Welcome back to Skills World Live. And it was on this day in 1927 when the American aviator Charles A. Lindbergh completed the first non-stop solo flight across the Atlantic Ocean from New York to Paris in his monoplane, the Spirit of St. Louis. It took just over 33 hours to cross the ocean in those days, and with so many of today's aircraft currently grounded, you have to wonder whether the aviation industry will ever be quite the same again. One thing is for sure, this only community radio show connecting the world of FE is going nowhere. We're not grounded, we're completely free to any Skills World aficionado in Britain or around the world that cares to tune in. And don't forget folks, there are so many ways of accessing news, views and interviews that regularly take place on this show. Just head over to one of your popular podcasting sites like iTunes and Spotify and simply hit subscribe. Got a really important topic coming up on the show tonight. It comes in a week when the ONS has recorded the biggest spike in unemployment since 1983. And perhaps the scariest and saddest thing of all is that these figures only cover the start of the coronavirus crisis, and they don't include the up to 7 million British workers that have been placed on furlough. We've covered on this programme before whether youth unemployment in the UK could hit 50%, and tonight we take that debate a stage further by discussing with a group of labour market experts whether the government should move now to set up a youth guarantee so that from this September we don't return to the kind of despair for those young people like myself, who grew up during the deep recession of the 1980s. It's a Thursday, of course, so that can only mean one thing. Hashtag Stand Up for Skills will be back in the closing segment of the show. This is where the City and Guild's top boss, Kirstie Donnelly, MBE, gets to follow my lead and moonlight as an FE community radio DJ. Tonight, Kirstie will be talking to her apprentice special guest. And coming up shortly, we'll be heading over to Wales, where the Economy Minister, Ken Skates, sets out his ambitious plans for building recovery and resilience in the Welsh post-16 college and work-based sectors. Colleagues in England, take note. But first, let's find out what's making the news headlines in your skills world this evening. Educational leaders in England continue to put pressure on ministers about their proposed 1st of June opening date for educational settings. The DfE has issued guidance saying it expects some pupils and students to start to return. The government says it will listen to the concerns of teachers and parents and that scientific advice will guide them in giving the final go-ahead for schools to reopen next month. One teaching union, the NASUWT, said that the government's plans as they stand were not appropriate or practicable. Meanwhile, individual college leaders continue to assess the extent to which they can reopen campus facilities from next month. Unions have written to principals saying they may be liable to prosecution under health and safety legislation if proper risk assessments and appropriate measures are not put in place. The row between unions and ministers has escalated on a day when the Secretary of State, Gavin Williamson, has announced an additional £6.5 million to fund social workers in schools to support vulnerable children at risk. In other news, the Wales Economy Minister, Ken Skates, has told Skills World Live that his priority is to defeat the coronavirus in this phase of the pandemic to avoid even greater disruption caused by a second spike of infections returning later this year. The Welsh Government has not set a firm date of when educational settings can reopen, but the Minister did reveal that the post-16 plan he is working to includes a review mechanism that could see new arrangements put in place for the next academic year. An exclusive interview with the Minister will be coming up on the programme shortly. And finally, a hair and beauty student, Chloe Hewitt, is not letting the pandemic stop her from reaching her ambition of owning her own nail and beauty salon. The Barnsley College student is studying for a Level 3 nail services qualification. Chloe showed her entrepreneurial spirit when she started working on a self-employed basis, gaining her own clients. The experience has enabled this young student to start the process of setting up her own salon once restrictions related to COVID-19 are fully lifted. That's all your Skills World news from fenews.co.uk. Contact us at Skills World Live. Email skillsworld@fenews.co.uk. Follow us on Twitter @Tom Bewick, @FENews. Use the hashtag SkillsWorld. Call us on 02032 900 111. That's 02032 900 111. Hallman and a track called Honesty. Regular listeners to this show will know that Hallman has quite a few catchy tunes in his repertoire. Just head over to that independent music site of choice, epidemicsound.com, where you can see the tracks that appear on this show and many more. Now, we're very fortunate on this show. Hard to believe, really, that we're still less than a month old in live format, yet so many guests are knocking down the door wanting to come on and talk to me. On last night's show, I interviewed England's Apprenticeships and Skills Minister, Gillian Keegan. And a couple of weeks ago, we had the Welsh Education Minister, Kirstie on the programme as well. I was delighted earlier on today to catch up with arguably one of the busiest politicians in the whole of the UK right now as he battles to keep his nation, Wales, on top of the challenges of the coronavirus. I'm talking about Ken Skates, the Minister for the Economy and Transport in Wales. And what follows shortly is our discussion earlier on today. You're listening to Skills World Live with Tom Bewick. News, views and interviews in association with FE News. Ken Skates, thank you very much for joining Skills World Live.
It's a pleasure to be with you. Thanks so much for the opportunity.
Minister, you've recently published a post-16 COVID recovery plan that envisages only gradual steps to reopening of educational settings in Wales in future, with no actual date set yet when you expect to see providers fully open. As Economy Minister, how damaging do you think it will be to the Welsh economy if uncertainty is prolonged and post-16 students are not back learning or training in at least this academic year?
Well, the greatest damage will be caused to the economy if we have a second wave of coronavirus. It's absolutely essential, therefore, that we deal with this virus now once and for all, that we don't allow it to return later in the year to disrupt significantly yet another academic year. Right. Dealing with the virus today will also help the economy of 2021. The last thing that we need in 2021 is for lockdown to return and for another year of activity and many, many more jobs to be lost. So whilst I understand the anxiety over a lack of a firm or even aspirational time frame, it's our belief that actually if you say to people, look, kill the virus today to get back to normal activities sooner, then people will go that extra miles and make sure that we deal with the virus today. Otherwise, there's a risk that we could be complacent, just looking to those aspirational dates without actually taking all of the time, all of the effort to destroy the threat that the virus poses.
Sure. I mean, obviously appreciate the Welsh Government, unlike your colleagues in England, haven't set an actual date for the reopening of educational settings. But would you expect to see face-to-face learning taking place, for example, in the next academic year?
Well, the plan is divided into three phases. There's the current rescue phase, which is focused on ensuring education providers have immediate security of funding and arrangements for learners in place this academic year. And then there's the second phase, which is the review phase, and that looks at potential changes this autumn, as you've identified, the potential for face-to-face learning to commence again. And then there's the third phase, which is the renewal phase, which will put arrangements in place for the remainder of the academic year 2020-2021. But I would point in terms of the dates that have been announced by UK government, it does appear as though, that's led to grave difficulties in terms of trying to meet those dates, implement the changes that are going to be required within education settings. And so, if anything, setting those dates have actually caused a massive disadvantage to the education sector in England.
Indeed, and educational leaders in England anyway, are taking different decisions about exactly when they are planning to reopen their educational settings. Now, the Welsh Government received lots of plaudits from the post-16 education sector for the way it moved very swiftly to secure the funding of the post-16 education and training sector. And essentially, you agreed as Economy Minister and with your colleagues in the Welsh Cabinet to continue to fund activity for learning, whether or not that learning actually took place. How much longer are you prepared as a government to continue to fund post-16 learning environments on that basis?
Public finance is stretched right now, but the last thing we want to do is risk losing the training and learning infrastructure that we have in place and that will be vital to the recovery of the economy. And so I'm determined to make sure that we go on supporting work-based learning activities as much as possible, training providers, further education institutions, to enable them at the appropriate time to ramp up activity in order to save the economy and to get growth back into the economy as soon as possible. So if anything, the money that we were rapid to stump up for the sector was an investment today to save in the long term. If we had stayed away from supporting the sector, for too long, then I'm afraid too much of it would have crumbled beneath our feet, and that would have caused significant difficulty in terms of being able to ramp up activity for the recovery period.
Yeah. Could you envisage a scenario in the future when these providers, for example, are audited by Welsh Government and you find that the activity either can't take place, hasn't taken place? Would you be in the business of clawing back any funds at that point? Or do you feel like that was money you were going to spend anyway?
Well, we shouldn't even reach that point because of the monitoring that's taking place. We're a relatively small network here in Wales of learning and education providers. We've always worked proudly in close collaboration with the sector, and that monitoring which is taking place, I think, would prevent any sort of activity that you've, or lack of activity that you've highlighted may be a risk elsewhere.
Okay. Now, the Welsh unemployment rate has already risen to 4.2%, which is slightly higher than the UK average of 3.9%. The Office for National Statistics this week recorded the largest spike in unemployment and a slump in job vacancies not seen since the deep recession of 1983. I mean, there will be listeners, Minister, in Wales who remember the massive scarring effect on the economy of the 1980s. What's the Welsh Government specifically planning to do to try and offset some of the effects of potentially a massive economic depression in Wales as a result of COVID-19?
Well, I grew up in North East Wales, where in a single day we lost more than 8,000 jobs at Shotton Steelworks. So I grew up during that period of the early 80s when we suffered terrible deindustrialisation and incredible levels of unemployment. We want to avoid that at all cost. And that's why we've developed Working Wales, a single point of contact that allows support to be shaped around the individual that faces unemployment or requires support to get back into employment. It's why we've got programs that are unique to Wales, such as Jobs Growth Wales, supporting young people to avoid long-term unemployment. That suite of packages that we've got through Working Wales will be absolutely vital now in ensuring that people can either stay in work or regain skills or gain new skills to ensure that they can get swiftly from one workplace to another, or if they're unemployed at the moment, to ensure that they get into appropriate work. But we also have, recognising that the economy is going to be a very different shape when we come out of coronavirus, regional skills partnerships that bring together training providers and businesses to ensure that what's being provided in terms of education training meets the needs of industry and businesses across the length and breadth of Wales, taking account, of course, of regional differences. And again, that's going to be hugely important as we shape a greener, fairer economy, as we do as the Metro Mayor of Manchester has urged us to do, which is to build back better. And I'm absolutely determined to make sure that we invest strategically in green growth, in fair growth, making sure that we narrow inequalities as we emerge from coronavirus, rather than succumb to the pressure that is often in place, which is to invest in those areas that are already relatively affluent and already have good infrastructure, whether it be digital or transport infrastructure in place. What we have to do as we come out of coronavirus is tackle inequalities within Wales and within the regions of Wales. And I'd urge the UK government to follow suit, to rebalance the UK economy. And the best way to do that is to invest in skills and to invest in infrastructure.
You mentioned there the UK government, and of course over the years, the Welsh government through devolution has got more and more powers returned to the Senate and the Assembly government. Is there anything additional you would like to see from the UK Treasury that would help you in that fight against the coronavirus in Wales?
Yes, there are a number of actions that could be progressed right now by UK government. I think we need long-term surety concerning furlough. We need to be part of the discussions regarding the scheme as it will operate between August of this year and October. But for some sectors, there's going to have to be further support through furlough and sector-specific funds, for example, in aviation and aerospace, where we've heard terrible job losses announced just recently, as well as sectors such as tourism, hospitality and the events sector. In addition to this, there are certain things that the UK government could do instantly to empower the Welsh government to be able to support regional connectivity. For example, they could give longer-term guarantees over emergency funding for public transport provision. They could give assurance regarding the devolution of powers over air passenger duty, which could assist in our efforts to hold Cardiff Airport up as an active and vibrant international airport. And there are other measures concerning economic development that the UK government could take, such as revisiting the UK industrial strategy with the devolved administrations there at the table, shaping a new post-coronavirus strategy that has rebalancing of the UK economy right at its heart.
Ken Skates, the Government Minister in Wales for the Economy and Transport, thanks very much for joining Skills World this evening.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for giving me the opportunity.
Subscribe to Skills World Live at fenews.co.uk/Skills World. Welcome back live. Now, to kick off tonight's big debate, should there be a youth guarantee for education and work? And I'm delighted that we're going to be joined by a labour market expert who contributed to a major report published by the Learning and Work Institute last week. With the last 5 years of relative jobs growth in the British economy wiped out in 1 month, according to these researchers, this group of experts believe that it's time for the government to act by investing £1 billion in a youth guarantee scheme. Delighted to be joined on the line by Dr. Fiona Aldridge, who's the Director of Policy and Research at the Learning and Work Institute. Good evening, Fiona.
Good evening.
Thanks for joining us. Now, let's just start with looking at these terrible numbers from the ONS this week. I mean, it's both sort of sad and shocking in equal measure. How bad do you think it could get for this all, potentially turning into an economic depression of the likes we probably haven't seen since the 1930s?
Yes, well, the figures are stark, aren't they? So our evidence shows that the 5 years of jobs growth has been wiped out in 1 month. And of course, the number of people who are unemployed or who are claiming universal credit continue to rise. And we also have concerns that for some of those who are currently furloughed, then actually they don't have jobs to return to. So I think the situation will get worse for quite a while. What we do need to do, though, is not wait for the situation to get worse. We need to act now, because there are some groups of the labour force that are more affected than others, and we're particularly concerned about young people. So there are, and I know you've been talking about it on previous shows, there's a whole range of young people who are already out of education and training, and over the coming months we'll see another 800,000 young people about to enter the labour force, and we need to ensure that there are opportunities for them. But of course, we need to make sure they're good education opportunities, and we need to think about how to ensure that they have jobs to go to and what we can do in terms of active labour market policies to help them with that, so they don't get a false start.
You mentioned active labour market policies there. I mean, I think that's a very good catch-all term for the position that the government sort of finds itself in. I mean, I thought it was interesting going through your report last week and indeed earlier today. You make 5 sort of major recommendations, of which obviously the youth guarantee is one of them, and that's what we're particularly focused on tonight. But do you just want to give us a flavour for some of the other measures that you've talked about in the report? I mean, for example, obviously you've got a recommendation, haven't you, around the coronavirus job retention scheme and what happens to that in the near term?
Yes, certainly. So we're really pleased to see that support in place. And of course, it has mitigated some of the immediate impact of the crisis. But we need to ensure that there's support so that furloughed workers who lose their jobs can find other jobs. And we need to ensure that the support that we have isn't just cut off, but it is tapered. So that's one of our recommendations. We're also recommending that there's more back to work support for the newly unemployed. So people who don't have a job now need to think about their skills, need to think about support to help them find new jobs, perhaps where the jobs that they've worked in previously, maybe for many years, aren't available now, and they'll need to have a new frame of mind, but new skills and new ways of looking for jobs. So that's key for us. We want to make sure that the long-term unemployed and disadvantaged are not left behind. And there were, of course, many people who were quite far from the labour market even before the crisis. One of the dangers with high numbers of people who are unemployed is that they get left even further behind. And then we don't want to forget the agenda about quality work. So of course we want to get people into work and tackle those unemployment numbers. But we do need to make sure that as we build the labour market back up, that's good quality work, and that we've got world-class employment and skills services for young people and for adults.
I thought it was interesting today, a paper from the Association of Employment Learning Providers, which again is sort of putting a stake in the ground about the kind of active labour market policies and the kind of measures that might be needed over the coming months. And they made the point that, we just haven't got time really to start sort of creating new schemes or even new structures. We've got to kind of work with what we've got. I mean, do you, as a labour market expert, do you think that we've got the right infrastructure to deal, frankly, with the scale of the challenge that's coming our way?
Well, the scale of the challenge is major. What I've been delighted to see is lots of organisations working together and working quickly and collaboratively to come up with solutions. And we were really pleased to bring together 8 different organisations who are labour market experts in order to be able to come up with solutions. And our solution of a jobs guarantee, it's not, we haven't imagined it out, we haven't come up with something out of the air, but it's very much based on the Future Jobs Fund, which was put in place after the 2008 financial crisis. And so I think we have a really good blueprint there to think about putting in an intervention now.
And in terms of the education promise, I think it's called in your report, I mean, just unpack that a little bit for me. But obviously, the higher education sector's under pressure. They might not get as many international students as they were expecting. They've had a £2.5 billion cash advance. Obviously, the further education sector's putting in its idea of any young person 16 to 19 that wants FE college place should get one. I mean, is that broadly what we're talking about? I mean, essentially ensuring that there's just no other option of frankly staying on the dole. You've either got to take up a series of either job work or training offers in future. Is that what you want for young people?
Well, we know that what happens to young people when they first enter the labour market is critical to their long-term prospects, and there can be a really major scarring effect from not getting that right at the start. So we've called for an education and employment promise for young people. So the education promise, for example, can build from the AOC, the Association of Colleges, September promise of an educational training place for all 16 to 18-year-olds. And we could use the current offer and build on it. So that's about extra funding for more places, high quality advice so young people choose the right sort of options. But we also have to recognise that it can be dangerous just to keep young people out of the labour market, because actually when they go in the year after, if they're not properly equipped and skilled and don't have the right experience, they're entering with yet another cohort to compete with. And so we do need to think about how to get young people into good quality employment and training, as well as other options as well, and to give young people the choice about what's best for them. And we do think that a job guarantee is a really good offer. There's been some evidence that from a US model, that when it is designed well, it can be really effective. And that would be, for example, so for those young people reaching 6 months unemployment, they could have specialist employment support, training, volunteering and work experience. But for those still unemployed after 9 months, we think that should be backed up by a guaranteed offer of a job.
Okay, well, look, I mean, the key point you're making there is it's all about the design of these programmes. I'm sure there are lots of people listening who've got long memories going back to the 1980s. They certainly don't want to return to a series of mate work schemes and sort of training without jobs, which was very much a feature of tackling that particular unemployment challenge. Alas, we've run out of time, but Dr. Fiona Aldridge, Director of Policy and Research at the Learning and Work Institute, pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for coming on the show this evening.
Thank you very much. Bye.
You're listening to Skills World Live with Tom Bewick.
Still got your pearls hanging by my bedside. Still got your lips on paper in a trash now. I never knew love could be so sweet. I never knew it would sting. I never knew love like this would leave me in pieces. Can't believe it's already over. Too late to talk and fix whatever's broken. I always thought love like ours would last. I never knew love could pass. Tomorrow comes and you are not around. Feels uneasy. Oh, Emily, when did you fall right out of love? Oh, Emily, when did the magic stop for us? Oh, but Emily, you are the part of me I feel. It will kill me when you leave and close my door. Who said it'd be easy to be in love? Who said that the sun would always shine? I'm not sure you realize what you are giving up. When did you fall right out of love? Oh, Emily, when did the magic stop for us? Oh, Emily, when did you fall right out of love? Oh, Emily, when did the magic stop for us? Oh, but Emily, you are the part of me I feel.
So that's a track called Emily, and it's by the Mondays. So there you go. I'm playing a track by the Mondays on a Thursday. What's all that all about? Anyway, delighted now to continue tonight's big debate on the Youth Guarantee. We're joined on the line by Tony Wilson, who's the Director of the Institute for Employment Studies, and Tracy Fishwick, OBE, who's part of the Transformed Lives Company, which I see shares the same acronym as Tender Loving Care. Tony, your institute has a wealth of research at its disposal about how the British labour market works. Do you think the period that we're about to enter has any real historical comparison in job market terms when you consider the almost unique impact that this pandemic is having on our society?
Hi, Tom. So no is probably the short answer.
No historical comparison. I thought you'd say that.
But so it's quite. So I think, what we saw on Tuesday with the claimant count data, the claimant unemployment data, it was the biggest monthly rise in unemployment since 1947.
Wow. So
the closest comparison to what we saw was the Great Winter and the fuel crisis of 1947. But way back then, that was the ice and the snow thawed, and everyone went back to work the following month. So it's not going to be the same this time, unfortunately. It's going to take us a little while to get back to where we were, I think.
Yeah, I mean, what a remarkable sort of comparison. I do like talking to someone that knows their history. And actually, that's a great metaphor, isn't it? Metaphor of the snow thawing and then just people going back. I think when this crisis first began, there was this sort of sense of, okay, we'll all be in lockdown for a few weeks. We'll get on top of the curve. And then actually, like switching a light bulb on, things will just get back. But that's clearly not what's now unraveling, isn't it? Particularly from an employment perspective.
No, that's exactly right. And that's exactly right. And there's a lot of talk about V-shaped recoveries and how quickly things would bounce back. Nobody really knew what might happen, but we had independent forecasts basically saying, in fact, the OBR, the Office of Budget Responsibility, was saying that the economy would bounce back more quickly than it fell. And by the end of the year, growth would be higher than it was at the start. I think now, a month on, it's pretty clear that won't be the case. I mean, we put a paper out back at the start of April saying, every time there's been a recession, every time there's been a labour market impact of this scale, it's taken at least 7 years for the labour market to recover. And we need to treat this as a crisis like that. So actually, saying that there is no historical comparison, but I'll tell you what, every recession, unemployment goes up immediately. Long-term unemployment goes up about 6 months later. And then we end up having to do a lot to help those people who get further and further from work, get back into work and closer to work. And there were 3 million people out of work looking for work before the crisis even began. So we're not starting from the best place.
It's absolutely terrifying. Tracy, you received your OBE for the work you've done, brilliant work you've done for the unemployed over the last 25 years. Tell us how you think a £1 billion investment then in this youth guarantee, the main theme of tonight, could work.
Hi, Tom. Yeah, thanks for having me on tonight.
You're welcome.
It's as Tony was saying, this is a thing that we've seen before, and some of us who have got longer careers of sort of been here and worked on some of these initiatives before, but this is an unprecedented thing. And I think the added thing that we are all thinking really hard about is the health implications. So not just in terms of is it safe, obviously that's an obvious one, but the sort of mental health and the impact that is going to have on people either thinking about going to work that we are currently working with, and this has been a massive shock to the system in terms of, how they're coping and how resilient they are, and that's a big thing that I think we've got to factor in this time. That's very different. Sure. But I think £1 billion investment probably isn't the full story in terms of what's needed, but in terms of what we saw about 10 years ago, that was the kind of figure that we had for the Future Jobs Fund programme to support many hundreds of thousands of young people. That was cut short really in its lifespan, but there's a model there, and there's a whole lot of history and a whole lot of organisations that know how to pick that baton up, I think, in order to make something like that or similar to that happen again.
Sure. And I mean, with your long memory then of things that have sort of worked and perhaps have not worked so well in the past, and I mean, I was picking up this point with Fiona just a few moments ago. I mean, how do we avoid also creating a lot of sort of mate work schemes? We spend money, but actually in the end, we're not really doing much more for young people than just temporarily putting them in a holding pen. How do we avoid that problem?
I mean, that's really important. And I think there's a lot of evidence and there's a lot of examples of how you can avoid that. And a key thing really is that the closer that we can connect young people to the real world of work in whatever shape or form that is, the better chance they have of sustaining employment longer term. So Future Jobs Fund saw about just under half of those people stay in employment after that 6 months. And that is, compares quite well with all the things that we see that try and support people who are young and not in work and struggling to sort of make that transition from education to the workplace.
Yeah. Tony, which sectors do you think are going to be most affected, both sort of short, medium, and even longer term? I mean, obviously, as I mentioned, aviation's virtually a closed sector at the moment, restaurants and bars. And of course, these are certainly restaurants and bars. I mean, that's the very sector often when young people get on the first rung of the labour market, whether that's because it's part-time, supporting studies, or, there's all sorts of ways in which they get into those sectors. I mean, how do you see the sectoral dimension of this sort of panning out? Because obviously for the health sector, it could be boom time, couldn't it, for a period of time in terms of employment? For
a period of time, yeah. I mean, although we publish weekly analysis of vacancy data, which we get from Adzuna, who are sort of one of the largest online job search engines. Right. It's funded by Joseph Rowntree Foundation, and so we've seen vacancies holding up in social care, in cleaning, and in health, to some extent holding up in health, and falling really across whole swathes of the economy outside of that. And so I think there is definitely a sectoral industrial dimension here, and hospitality and retail, not non-food retail, have really significantly hit, as are transport and the sort of and tourism and the visitor economy. Now, what's going to happen next? It's hard to tell. I think one thing I would say is we probably shouldn't be too sentimental about these were the sorts of jobs actually that a few months ago many of us were saying are often low paid, low quality, insecure jobs. They're now the ones that we're obviously fighting to protect through a job retention scheme. I think the most important thing is that we're helping those people. And many of those jobs we can, we'll come back. We'll come back when the economy recovers and when we suppress the virus. So the job retention scheme is absolutely the right thing to do. Yeah. But for those that aren't going to come back, particularly in hospitality, where that's going to face, I think, quite significant damage, then we do need to be shifting from passive subsidies of wages to more active measures to actually help those people find better jobs, good quality jobs with prospects and training.
Do you think then, Tony, this could be a bit of a big wake-up call for employers? Because you're absolutely right. I mean, just 12 weeks ago, the whole debate was we have this full employment economy, but we also have this productivity puzzle. We've got more people employed than ever, but we're also talking about an average of a 40% productivity gap with some of our major competitors. We've got employers not adapting to new technology. We're very reliant on cheap labour from, the European Union, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, is this just going to cause one massive reset, do you think, for the British economy and employer behaviour?
So a few things will happen. So I think first, everything in the short term is going to depend on how quickly we can suppress the virus and how quickly we can implement test and trace and try and get back towards something resembling normality. If we can't do that, then all the talk about lockdown and easing lockdown will be for the birds, because people simply won't feel confident and safe enough to go back shopping, to go back out and to be doing the things they used to do. But if we can do that, then I'm more on the optimistic side, to be honest, because this isn't like the credit crunch. This isn't like 2008-9.
Yeah.
A lot of firms will have a lot of damage to repair from the crisis, but we could see the economy producing a lot of jobs in the near future. And so the challenge for us really is going to be how we get that balance right between labour and capital, as it were, because in a very, very weak labour market now, then we're going to see downward pressure on wages, downward pressure on job security, and it's going to be really tough for job seekers. There's going to be 6 jobs right now. There's probably about 6 job seekers for every vacancy, and that was only 1.5 job seekers per vacancy a few months ago. So I do think we need to think about. Well, we need to do more than think. We need to be acting to try to improve job quality, to try to invest more in skills, and to try to work more closely with employers to get this right.
And the report with those 5 key recommendations, I think, goes into a lot of the detail about the practical things that you can do. Tracy, final word to you, because we've only got sort of 30 seconds. Do you share Tony? He's the rational optimist about the way forward. Again, with your kind of experience over 25 years, could you share a slither of optimism perhaps with our audience tonight about what could come good out of this?
I was just thinking as well about the fact that, we've also been talking about climate change and, the green economy a lot. And I think that this is also an opportunity for us to do something really constructive around that. Actually, it is safer to be outside at the moment. So, we could also combine that kind of activity and skills building and projects that need doing and also create jobs. Not just for young people, but for lots more people. And I think that we, like Tony, we need to see where the opportunities are and act as soon as we possibly can. And I think the great thing is there's so many organisations that have pulled together over the last couple of months to share ideas, but also to put those actions, plans together. I think that,
Sure.
The alternative isn't worth thinking about, so we just have to do it, don't we?
That's a very wise words there. The alternative is not worth thinking about. Look, I'd love to talk to you some more, but alas, we ran out of time. But thanks so much for joining Skills World Live this evening.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tom.
Cheers.
Bye.
You're listening to Skills World Live with Tom Bewick.
It's getting closer to midnight. I try to get closer to you. Drinking courage from my red cup now. I will soon make a move. Ooh, I can taste it. The bittersweetness of taking a shot. A risk worth taking. If it's a shot of love, baby, I adore you. Maybe I adore you. Yeah, I'm feeling high and high. I'm up on cloud 9. Baby, I adore you. now, 'cause I adore you, adore you. Trying my best not to lose control. I want you, that's all I know. Trying my best not to lose control, 'cause I adore you. Baby, I adore you. Maybe I adore you. Yeah, I'm feeling higher and higher, I'm up on cloud nine. Baby, I adore you. Trying my best not to lose control. I want you, that's all I know. Trying my best not to lose control, 'cause I adore you, adore you.
That was Adore You by Wake Up with What 3RS. And I tell you what, there's someone that the post-16 sector absolutely adores, I'm about to hand over to shortly as part of, and she's laughing already, part of the hashtag Stand Up for Skills campaign. I'm talking, of course, about Kirstie Donnelly. Good evening, Kirstie.
Hello, Tom. I don't think anyone's ever said they adore me, but thank you for that. That was
There
lovely.
you go. Well, you got that special track request now. You should download that to your iTunes library. It's obviously it was about you. No, look, it's brilliant to have you back on this segment on the Thursday evening. So over to
Great to
you,
be
DJ.
Thank you very much. Thanks for letting me take over the reins. So, listen, it's been a fascinating discussion again tonight, Tom. And look, let's just say how much you're keeping our spirits lifted and through this period, because of course what we want to focus on is obviously the challenges, but also the opportunities, and also some of the success stories that are still coming out as we continue in this COVID period. So I'm delighted that this evening I'm being joined by Olivia Freedman, who for me represents what Stand Up for Skills is all about, really. A successful apprentice who's only just this last week been offered her permanent role at Tempest Resourcing. So great to have a real good news story, because of course what we're all worrying about, and the conversation that we've been hearing this evening, what is going to happen to all our young people as they come through education. Where are those opportunities going to be? And also, let's not also forget about all those adults that we've been hearing about who are going to need reskilling and retraining. And only this week, we heard before from Fiona about her research, but only this week, Sutton Trust published their report. And we know that 2/3 of employers are saying that apprentices have now lost out on work experience or learning. So we clearly do have a whole series of issues that we've got to face out as a sector and also with government. But in the meantime, it's really great this evening to be able to focus on the positives. As I say, I'm joined now by Olivia Freedman. Olivia was doing her level 3 business administration apprenticeship with Tempest Resourcing, and also being supported by CTEC, the provider. And as I say, I'm delighted, Olivia, to have you with me. And you, of course, were placed into your job only last week. So how does that feel, firstly, especially during this particular acute time of COVID?
Good evening. Thank you for having me. It feels great. I think to secure a permanent role at any time is a really good thing, but especially at the moment when we see really disheartening figures about what could be happening to unemployment in the country, it's a really good feeling to be offered a role at the moment.
Well, you clearly deserve it. So, and I'm sure you'll bring great hope for all those other would-be apprentices who are out there. But what's it actually been like doing your apprenticeship whilst being in lockdown? What's sort of been different? Because of course you've been doing it before lockdown as well, last February. But what's it been like during this particular period?
During this period, if anything, it's almost come as a slight advantage, just because it has actually given me time to really focus and crack down as I was coming up to my endpoint assessment. Right. The main changes were basically in terms of how I was receiving the support. So I stopped receiving visits, and it was mainly through the phone, and then also how I was assessed as well. But all positive changes, and I just want to say a huge thank you to CTEC Outsource and Lizzie, who was my coach, because they've just been amazing in supporting me during this change.
Oh, I'm sure they'll really, really appreciate that shout out. So, but I mean, you've obviously you focus there on what has changed, and you're talking there about online support, telephone support. So, are you actually suggesting, Olivia, that you actually found that more beneficial than how it was before? You know, when we're doing it more face to face. Is that what you were saying?
I wouldn't say it's necessarily more beneficial. I think the benefit to me was the fact that I've had more time to study coming up to my endpoint assessment.
Right.
But I definitely feel that knowing that everyone is on their emails a little bit more, on their phone a little bit more, I could pick up the phone or send an email and I'd get a reply pretty instantly, just because that is how people are communicating at the moment.
Yeah, it's amazing actually how many people you can get a meeting with at the moment that you wouldn't normally be able to. You have to wait weeks to get in their diary. So I can see that. But just on, staying with this theme, of course, you were there saying you were studying. You had a bit more time to focus yourself on preparing for your endpoint assessment. But that, of course, meant that your endpoint assessment happened differently. So just tell us a little bit about that sort of whole online experience and how that felt for you.
So the main bit that changed was my multiple choice test. So usually I would do that at work in a conference room, being supervised by someone from CTEC or City and Guilds. But however, now obviously I was doing it from home, and I actually found it beneficial. I think as most people would, you feel more relaxed in your own home. So just being in a familiar setting really helped me relax and focus on my exam itself. And I did find that much more benefiting to me.
Oh, that's good. And did you didn't find it difficult sort of having to apply slightly different instructions? I mean, obviously I assume you had to do a video call and share access to your screen, and you had to have you still had to be supervised, but none of that sort of put you off?
No, I think where it came after I'd been working from home for a good 7 weeks, I was quite used to using that software, knowing how to share my screen. I was pretty confident with that. It didn't put me off at all.
Brilliant. And as you sort of look ahead, now you're employed fully, brilliant news. And of course, I don't know quite, I assume you are currently working from home yourself remotely. What do you think are sort of some of the advantages that might continue even beyond, as we look beyond COVID on our life after COVID? Do you see some advantages coming out of the COVID situation and how the world of work will change, especially for someone, young like yourself who's starting out in your career?
Sure. I think if we can draw any advantages from this situation, it has been what we've all learned during this time in lockdown. And I think I've been working from home for about 10 weeks now, and there's a certain level of self-discipline that you can only learn once you're put into the situation itself. I could always say before coming into this, I'd be good working from home, I won't get distracted, but it's only once you have to do it that you really learn how to do it. So I think that's definitely something that I can take going forward. And it also means that maybe some people could think about whether an office is necessarily essential. I know I can do 100% of my role from home. Obviously, I do miss going to work, but it does make you think, how much do we actually need to sit in a workspace, or can we take a more flexible approach to people that would really benefit from a flexible working day?
Yes, and some of the advantages that come with that, actually, and that's interesting because I don't know if I mentioned earlier, but I meant to mention that, of course, this week is actually the week where we're recognising mental health and awareness, and the theme is actually kindness, and I do think one thing we're having to be is very kind to ourselves in this new working environment. But you're right, having that flexibility is all part of that. But you've not found it difficult to in any way cope with giving yourself breaks and being able to sort of break the chain between when you're working and when you're not working? Have you found that sort of quite easy to do?
I think it's definitely taken some adjustment. I definitely went through an adjustment period before I settled into it. But what I really tried to do, and what I do manage to do every day, is just settle into the routine that I was doing at work. I eat my meals at the same time. I take my breaks at the same time. Just getting into the same routine that I was doing when I was still in the office has really helped me carry on.
Right. I think I could do to come get some tips from you, actually, to get my day better. and I was mentioning a moment ago when Tom was introducing me some other research that's been published this week from the Sutton Trust, and the impact that employers are seeing for apprentices right now. What advice would you give to employers who might perhaps have had to stop having apprentices in the workplace, and what would you be saying to them as you get them to think about the next weeks and months ahead? About how important it is still to invest?
Definitely. So obviously I can understand why there would be some hesitation. I think all companies are going through some financial uncertainty at the moment. I think my advice to employers would be the same as at any period. Apprentices are looking to do an apprenticeship because they know the industry they want to work in and they know the skills they want to learn. So they should really take advantage of people that are really eager to start their careers and earn some experience. And I've also found from my experience that the best way for someone to work in a way that you would like and to train someone that way is to get them as an apprentice, and that could allow them to be a real benefit to the organisation.
What a brilliant advert for all those employers who hopefully will be listening or will listen at a later point into why you should take an apprentice on. And Olivia, thank you so much for being with us this evening. The very, very best of luck with your new job. There's no doubt, it sounds to me, that you're going to go from strength to strength. I have no doubt at all that your employer, Tempest Resourcing, are delighted to have had you an apprentice and now have you as a fully served employee. So the very best of luck, and look forward to talking to you again in the future and hearing more about your career. And back over to Tom. Thanks, Olivia.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Take care.
Thank you to you both. I was scribbling away Olivia's top tips there on how to be self-disciplined working from home. Kirstie Donnelly, Olivia Freedman, thank you for this week's #StandUpForSkills.
Cheers, Tom.
You're listening to Skills World Live with Tom Bewick. Fantastic segment there. Always enjoy hooking up my old colleague, Kirstie Donnelly. Now, don't forget, tune in to the next episode of Skills World Live tomorrow, because we'll be looking at the skills needed in the fourth industrial revolution and asking whether all the prophecies of mass automation will change as a result of the pandemic. Although we're pretty chock-a-block now with guests for the future shows, thanks to the hard work of the Skills World Live production team and Gavin O'Mara, if you do want to be on the show, do contact us, skillsworld@fenews.co.uk. And talking of the production team, of course, thanks to Gav, but also to Ellie Hansen, our digital producer. Skills World Live is an FE News production, supported by the Federation of Awarding Bodies Platinum Partners Programme. Thanks for joining, everyone. See you tomorrow. Subscribe to Skills World Live at fenews.co.uk/skillsworld.